Hello, and welcome to the Law Deals podcast, where we help law firm owners create succession plans, profitable partnerships, and seamless practice transitions. We're on a mission to help you build a sellable firm so you can reduce your firm's dependency on you, choose who you work with and what you do, convert your practice into retirement security, and maximize the financial return on your life's work. I'm your host, Ed Alexander, a business lawyer with 31 years experience, owner of Alexander Business Law, and a principal of Fitzgibbon Alexander, Inc., a consulting and brokerage firm. I'm really excited about having Steve on today because Steve has deep experience with law firm growth and transitions. And his is not just the how I did it expertise. It is based on many different transitions from many different firms. Over the past decade, Steve has guided more than 60 attorneys through the intricate process of buying, selling, merging, and growing their practices. Steve is an attorney, practice advisor, and expert in law firm growth and transitions with the nation's premier coaching and consulting company, Atticus, dedicated to helping lawyers build great practices and fulfilling lives. Steve is also a friend. Steve successfully founded, grew, and sold his law practice, gaining firsthand experience of the emotional, operational, and financial complexities of transitioning law firms. He is also the creative mind behind transformative programs such as the Practice Growth Program, Dominate Your Market, Double Your Revenue, and Grow Your Practice with AI. Steve has authored 7 influential books and earned national recognition for his innovative approaches to law practice management. He also hosts the acclaimed podcast, Great Practice, Great Life, which has attracted an international audience of lawyers dedicated to achieving professional success and personal fulfillment. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Thank you, Ed. It's great to be here. I'm really delighted to be part of the conversation of helping other lawyers build practices that serve their lives, and when it's time to exit, sell them profitably. So I'm all behind your mission. I love what you're doing. I love your podcast. So thanks for the hard work you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. All right. So let's start off first with your story, right? So you built a successful practice, actually twice, one in 2 different practice areas, and then you sold it to join Atticus as a principal.
Yeah, it's hard for people to understand because I've basically, like you, I've been doing a lot of things in the legal industry for a while, but I spent the first 10 years of my career as a litigator. And I built a plaintiff's practice, and I built it up to about 4 attorneys, 14, 15 staff, and hated it. And it wasn't that I hated the law, I just hated the complexity of managing it. So, I had this really bright idea. I hired a coach who's now my partner, Mark Powers, back when Atticus was called the Mark Powers Corporation. And Mark and I had some extensive conversations, and I decided to transition from plaintiffs into estate planning. And I spent probably maybe a year making the plan and jettisoned a lot of bad cases, jettisoned a lot of bad employees, selected my 100 best PI cases, referred everything out, and then literally moved across town and redesigned a estate planning practice that was really aimed at the psychographic, the demographic of what I thought was the market I was going to serve. So PI is about power. So if you're marketing personal injury, it's going to be a power play. Estate planning is about peace of mind. So I had to really pivot my positioning in the market and really kind of start over. So when I started the estate planning practice, like most knuckleheads, I thought estate planning was easier than PI. It looked easier, but it actually was much harder because of the phenomenon of average revenue per case. So as a PI lawyer, you can calculate what your average revenue per case is. And with estate planning, you actually have to do higher volume and more marketing to support an estate planning case to make the same amount of money you're doing at PI. I wish I'd known that before I transitioned. But the other practice was based on ads, advertising, TV commercials, things like that. In the new practice, I decided to go all in on referral-based marketing. So I started with myself and 3 really great employees, and funny enough, built it up to about 4 to 5 lawyers and about 14 to 15 staff, and hated it. So what I realized, it wasn't the law I hated, it was the management. I had the skill set to only manage about that many people. And that was really causing the frustration. I didn't know how to manage more than that. So I hit what I call the span of management ceiling both times. When I sold the practice, which I had been in the estate planning field maybe a decade, and built it up very quickly because I knew what I was looking for. I knew what I was doing. I knew the story I wanted to tell from a marketing perspective, and built it very, very fast. The key component for me was I knew I was going to sell it. And what triggered the sell wasn't a new opportunity. What triggered the sell was actually my mom. So I was in Tampa, and my mom and dad live in Ormond Beach, Florida, north of Daytona Beach, where I grew up, basically. Grew up from like the age of 12. And my mom developed Alzheimer's. And my dad is a retired FBI agent. He was a SWAT team commander, and he retired officially at the age of 76 after doing work comp fraud investigation. So he is not a nurturing caregiver. So I want to be, I love my father, but not a nurturing caregiver. So my wife and I made the decision to move from Tampa to Daytona because I kept going across I-4 every time there was a problem. And we made the decision then to move. And I was commuting back and forth between Daytona and Tampa. I'd spend the weekends with my family. And we literally bought a house 3 doors down from my folks. So I went back and forth, and my wife's like, "This is not going to work for us as a family. It's time to make a decision." So that's really what triggered the sell.
It's fantastic that you had the ability to make that kind of change and not have it really kind of destroy your practice, because so many times we see that kind of thing come up, and then the practice is ultimately destroyed as a result of it. So fantastic. Kudos to you for that.
Well, it's important. It's one of the reasons you and I do the work we do is I try and tell other lawyers, you have 2 ways to test your law firm. One is to take great vacations and take huge blocks of time off so you can see if the firm can operate without you, or have a loved one get really sick or you get really sick. Mm-hmm. I prefer the great vacation test, right?
Yeah. A little bit better.
A little bit better. A lot more fun. A lot less stress. But yeah, you're right. And when I did the plaintiff's practice, I really had not thought about my exit. I was very young at the time and really had not thought about the exit. But with Atticus's help, because everybody gets confused. It's not like I grew up in Atticus. I grew up outside of Atticus as a customer, and I'm now a partner in Atticus. But at the time, the conversation about how to build a law firm for sale was there. And so when I did the estate planning practice, and it was estate planning elder law with a very, very hardcore business focus, meaning representing business owners. When I did that, I began with the question of how can I build this to sell it? Mm-hmm. And that's really, really what was the first question I started asking myself.
We're talking like 98, 99, right? Isn't that kind of maybe time frame? That's pretty innovative for 98, 99, because the rule allowing you to sell a practice only became effective in 93. And, I tell the story in the Guide to Selling Your Florida Law Practice about how I approached an older lawyer who was retiring and asked him, "Hey, do you want me to take your files that you had, and I'll take them, and I'll go ahead and move forward?" And he thought I was proposing an ethical violation when I did that. I mean, that's kind of the state of so much of the profession at that time. So really was innovative that you're thinking that out of the box.
Are clueless, or just straight up clueless. Like, at the time, it wasn't. Sometimes innovation is just a really bad mistake. It's like, okay, I made this really bad mistake. I had not, ethically, I had not understood the rules. I had not understood the complexity. Now I know it backwards and forwards, right?
Yeah.
But at the time when I was doing it, I really didn't understand it. So the 2 things I did at the same time, which one was actually brilliant in retrospect. With one, I bought a building, and the building was 15,000 square feet. And I put my new office in the building. At the time, it was 1,500 square feet in the building. So it was just me and, like I said, a couple of employees when we bought that building. So I probably was in South Tampa for, I think, about 3 to 4 years, and then bought the building and then moved into the building. And the building was in the West Shore district of Tampa, because I was trying to be more nestled among the financial planners, the CPAs, the other law firms. And that's where I was trying to aim my market.
Well, especially important in a referral practice too, because I find that if you're not in the downtown core, there's this kind of somewhat of a bias against, this idea that if you're not downtown, you're not a real firm or something, along those lines. So good move, especially when you're looking for referrals from, the more traditional firms and then the CPAs as well.
The cost of client acquisition was something I was very conscious about.
Mm-hmm.
And in this day and age of, dancing TikTok videos and Facebook ads and LinkedIn ads and all the cool things you can do online, sometimes lawyers forget that, and you and I are both kind of the same mindset here. Sometimes lawyers forget that probably the most valuable and consistent source of business is good referrals. So I had to learn how to ask for referrals, I had to learn how to develop a referral base. I had to learn how to develop really good relationships with other professionals. And I am by nature an introvert. I am by nature not an outgoing guy. Like, so people meet me at workshops and conferences like, oh, wow, you're really outgoing. No, I hate it, but it's a learned skill.
Yeah. It's interesting because somebody like that, like you, I mean, you can go there and you can perform, which I've seen you do through Dominate Your Market, which great program, and double your revenue. But if you're somewhat like me, and what happens is I can go do that for 8 hours, but at the end of the 8 hours, I am so spent. I don't want anybody to talk to me. I just want to crawl up in my hotel room and go to sleep,
Right. That's exactly right. So I think it was a skill I developed when I was trying cases and doing the litigation practice. I just learned how to focus my energy, focus my attention for a really short period of time, like interval training, and then let go. And I think that's how workshops work for me today. So I put together 5 lessons that I kind of wish I knew. So if it works for you, is it okay if I work for lesson 1, or is there anything else you want me to say
No,
about
that's
that?
great. That's perfect. Let's go into lesson 1.
Okay, so if I had to do this over, I would recommend to someone who's listening to this is build the firm that you have now for the buyer. And what I mean by that is sometimes lawyers build the firm for themselves, their own needs. So I really would recommend that you think, and I'll talk about how to shop for a buyer in a bit, but I really would recommend that you think about, okay, what would a buyer want in my firm? What would a buyer consider valuable? What would a buyer find in the firm that would be valuable to them? Which is radically different when you go to build a firm. A lot of lawyers, and you know this, Ed, I don't need to tell you this, but a lot of lawyers are just so inward focused on me inside the growth of the practice, either because they're unconscious about it or they're just time starved. Like they don't have enough time to think, so they're running as fast as they can. So they don't really have a lot of time to intentionally think about how to build. But every day when you write a check for something that's not to yourself, my question becomes, how does that check impact the value of the law firm for a potential buyer? So your case management system, your marketing, your website, your intake process, every time you look at that check investing into the firm, I want you to really scratch your head a little bit and go, how would this make my firm more attractive to a buyer? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing that I see where the most egregious breach of that I would see is that hero mindset, right? And it's that I am the firm. Everything has to come through me. The firm is all about me, right? And it's interesting because I've had people question, our marketing techniques that I think we both agree on are this relationship building, and relationship building is around a person, but at the same time, we don't want the firm to be all about the person, right? And so those two things have to live together. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on that in particular.
Yeah, that's great because that's lesson 2 for me. Avoid the hero, the story trap. So I want to talk about this just for a few minutes because you nailed it, Ed. You really did. Lawyers usually frequently trap themselves in their own firm by trying to be a heroic manager, a heroic lawyer. And what I mean by that is if you ever tell yourself, only I can respond to the client email, only I can meet the client, only I can take the client phone call, only I can do this, only I. Whenever you say only I, you're the hero in that story. Now it's important to understand because once you get about 4 to 6 people working for you and they understand you're the hero, they will always delegate any problem, small or large, to you.
Mm-hmm.
And you actually end up entrapping yourself. So I always have this joke. I said, Gotham created Batman. However, lawyers, so they can be Batman, create Gotham. So a lot of lawyers create chaotic little practices because they've never set back and said, okay, what am I actually doing here? And I also think the second prong of that is lawyers are intellectually intelligent, like upper 2% of the planet. You look at studies, we're conceptual problem solvers. That's what we're paid for. But emotionally, we're very stilted creatures. So our emotional awareness, our emotional intelligence is very, very small. So we're not self-aware. And we didn't go to law school because we're self-aware. We went to law school because we were able to achieve certain academic and certain scores on the LSAT. But law school completely does not address the emotional needs of what makes a good lawyer. And most of that we find out in the trench. We either, it's a sink or swim training process.
That's right.
So sometimes lawyers build their firms for their own emotional validation. And I see this a lot because as I talk to lawyers, I'm like, well, maybe we can start having non-lawyers do intake. Now, that in itself is a controversial question. I can recommend that you check out. I've done a couple of podcasts on how to do that. Don't worry about the ethics. Don't worry about all that. But just listen to the question. The question is, where can we remove you as the centerpiece in the process? And the key to unlocking the jail is really the question of making the client the hero of the story in their firm. So when you take a step back and say, who's really on the heroic journey? Well, it's actually the client, the prospect becoming client, and in your representation of them. So once you start looking at how do I take care of that person on their journey through whatever this experience is, whether it's family law, PI, I don't care what it is, business transaction, I don't care. Then you start to realize that your job is to take care of them, and you start to pivot everything. All your thinking starts to pivot around how do I help my client, who's actually the hero of my story, go through their process, whatever that process may be.
So, Steve, that's fantastic because so then you become the guide. And I always like to recommend the Story Brand book. Wonderful book on this particular topic. And there's a number of them, but I really enjoyed that one. And it does lay it out, that framework of you being the guide and the client or customer in that case being the hero of the story.
It's a fantastic book, but the core of this is Don Miller's book is on marketing.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm actually after is getting you as the lawyer clear on your mindset. And so Miller's book is fantastic for thinking about it from a marketing perspective. But a lot of lawyers that have read Miller's book and other books still are the center of the universe. And I can't quite, I've watched this ad. Like I said, I've done about 60 transactions for lawyers, selling, merging, buying. And the emotional lack of awareness by the lawyer of what they're doing in that practice and what they're building is a key intangible value driver. So it's Miller's book's great on the marketing side, but I'm really trying to get the lawyer here to take a moment, take a deep breath, and say, wow, if I actually built a firm that's all about me and I am the hero in the client's journey. Now, caveat, there's a caveat footnote. I don't know if this will make the podcast, but there are three business models. There's three practice models: the commodity model, the experienced practitioner model, the expert model. So sometimes in marketing, based on what you do in your practice, we may market you as a hero for marketing purposes, but I wouldn't run the practice with you being the hero. So There's a distinction there, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So we've the way I talk those three models is the process firm, the relationship firm, and then the brain surgery firm, right?
That's
and
perfect.
So in the relationship and brain surgery firms, you're typically going to be the center of the marketing, but you're correct. You do not want to be the center of the practice, right? Because you're creating a prison from which it's going to be very difficult to extract yourself.
Yeah, and once your team, this is the thing a lot of lawyers don't get, once your team realizes that you have a heroic need to be validated, they will delegate you to death.
Mm-hmm.
And my son is a great example of this. When he was a little kid, he would say, well, this looks like something that only an adult should do. Oh, I don't know how to do this. This is very complicated. Oh, they're very mad. You should talk to them. I shouldn't talk to them. Oh, this is very hard for a child to do. A child shouldn't do this. He was masterful at delegating things that he didn't want to do to his mom. He was just masterful. And I realized, listening to some of the lawyers I worked with and myself, oh my God, we've been played for years. And if you want to hold back the growth of your firm, make sure that your team's always delegating up to you, no matter what it is, a customer service issue, a technical problem, IT problem. The more that they've learned that you'll solve that problem, they'll wait till 4:30, 5 o'clock, hand that grenade right to you so they can make it to their kid's soccer game, and then let it blow up on your desk, and you're there till 7 o'clock cleaning up the mess because you're a hero. So it is a very, very insidious trap that I every day I try and grab that slippery pig and wrestle it to the ground with our clients. But it is a thing that owns a lot of lawyers. They're literally owned by being the hero. And I think it's low emotional intelligence. I think it's just the need to be emotionally validated, low self-esteem, low self-confidence, and being unaware, just unconscious of how they're thinking about who they are and what they do inside their practice.
Yeah.
Now, being a lawyer is a heroic thing. It's a privilege to practice law. I think it's one of the coolest things I've done next to being a dad and husband, number one and number two. But it's very cool to be a lawyer. And some of the things I look back on and I've done, I feel very privileged and very, very cool to have done that. And I love our members and I love lawyers. And I can't say I did that when I first started practicing, but I'm passionately in love with the practice of law. And I'm a passionate advocate for lawyers to look out for themselves, have a great life, build that great practice, but not kill themselves in the process. And I think that's part of the awareness.
Yeah, I think part of it is that it is consuming. It can be all consuming. And so it's taking the time to step back and do that metacognition of how am I thinking about this, right? And the only way to do that is to step back. If you are on fire every day, you're in that hero situation. And, it's worth it to put the fires aside for a few hours, a day, whatever, and to really get your head in a space where you can think, right? So that you are not worried about the fires day in and day out, and that you can really kind of look at your practice from an outside perspective. What does the client see when they come into my practice? And how do we need to change it so that it isn't a prison for me and it is serving the client in the best way?
Perfect. Before we move on to lesson 3, I just want to say this one thing. Anyone who's listening to this, I want to encourage you not to consider that you have to be like 100% better at this. My experience when I grew my practice, and Ed, you can speak to this because you're really great at marketing, you're really great at how you run your practice. You don't have to be 100% better. You just have to be about somewhere between 10 to 20% better. And if you're 10 to 20% better, you will own your market. You don't have to be like the most amazing business, the most amazing law firm. Just about 20% better puts you in the upper 5% in your marketplace pretty quickly.
I would add to that, Steve, that you don't have to be 20% better overnight. When we were doing the Dominate Your Market, I remember there was a particular book that we read, and it was Kaizen, right? And it's that talk about little changes here and there, and the resistance that you get from everybody around you and really from yourself and your brain is if I try to make a 20% or 10% or even a 5% change today, it's going to backfire, right? But if I make small little changes along the way, things really go well. And the little changes compound on one another. It's not just one and I have to do it 20 times to get to 20%. It's one and then one and then I get there faster because it's like compound interest, right?
I love it. Great point, Ed. Great point. All right. You ready for lesson 3?
I am.
All right. Lesson 3 is understand how you're going to shop for a buyer. And this is why your brokerage, some of the work that you're doing, is so critical. I never considered at the time to have a law firm broker. I didn't even know such a thing existed. But it is important, going back to lesson number one, you're building for a buyer. Lesson number three is what buyer, and I'm sure you've talked about this in the past, but you have opportunistic buyers, you have strategic buyers, you have different types of buyers in the marketplace. So when you start to build, you start to think about, okay, who would want to buy this and why they would want to buy this.
Right.
Now, when I was practicing, I looked at acquiring a couple of practices, other lawyers that were running estate planning practices, and they were like, hey, my practice is amazing. It's so valuable, blah, 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 blah. And their practices were messy. Like, they're like, I called them shag carpet practices. Like you go in and they haven't changed anything since they put down shag carpet in the 70s in this place, right?
I love that expression. I stole it from you, Steve. I use it all the time.
It's fine. Well, it's fine, but it's, you get it and you think they got like Tandy computers from Radio Shack, which is out of business, and they got cables running across the floor. And, like when I sell this place, Marge and I are going to retire, but you're going to pay me $1 million for this practice that's generating $300,000 in revenue.
Right.
And here are all the files over here. And, here's the hard drives and here you go. Like just write me a check for $300,000. You're like, dude, it's going to cost me $100,000 to fix this place before I can, no, right. This is a liability. This is not an asset. There's a liability.
Right. I got 10,000 people on my prior client list. Oh, great. Where are they? Oh, they're over here in the Pendaflex that's behind me. Yeah,
that's exactly right. And I got lawyers will call me, and they'll call me, especially in California. This seems to be the kind of thing in California. And I'll have a client call me, hey, so-and-so is thinking about selling their practice. And I'm like, what's the ethical rules for holding on to files? Go check out the ethical rule. Oh, well, the rule means I got to hold on the files for the rest of my life. Like all the physical, how many physical files do they have? Oh, they got like 3 storage sheds of physical files. I see. And what are they paying a month for those physical files? $600 a month. I see. Yeah. And is air conditioned storage? Yeah, air conditioned storage. So ethically, you're going to take over the liability of holding those files for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. So think about what you're saying here. Those files are not digitized. They're not files that you can email these people.
Right.
This lawyer's trying to figure out who to unload their storage center to and their ethical obligation. This is not a deal.
Right.
This is stupid. You don't want to do that. And so it's like, you're sitting there going, have you, you're a lawyer. Think this one through. Like, what are you doing here?
So, I mean, such key questions, right? Is have they kept up with the standard for technological advancement, right? And unfortunately, I'm just sorry to say that so many older lawyers just have not kept up. Servers, they still have servers, things of that nature. It's like, oh man, you know.
Yeah, when I go to help someone look at buying a practice or merging, the first thing I go to is their tech stack. Mm-hmm. What's their CRM? How are they managing cases? How do they manage intake? How do they manage data? How do they manage paper? How do they manage digital files? Show me what their tech stack is. Show me how they operate the practice from a tech perspective. And right there, right then and there, if I'm like, okay, they've got it figured out digitally, like they're running a good practice from a technology perspective, then I go to stage 2. If they're not, I'm like, get out. Just don't even bother. Don't even bother, because it's like buying a car with no engine. I'm like, it's a relationship business, yes, but you're managing data and you're buying data for somebody else. And the files, I don't care. I mean, I really don't care. I'm at a point in the time where people are like, well, they're going to give me all these files. The files are liabilities. Now, the relationships where you can email their clients is an asset.
Total asset.
But the paper files are liabilities. I got all these will files for the past 30 years. I don't care.
Yeah.
You got this phone number. How many phone calls do you get a week, a month? How many cases we got in the past 2 years? I don't know. It's word of mouth marketing. You've heard all this stuff before, where I'm like, let's just take the money and time that you're going to spend fixing that lawyer's mess and just work on your own practice. We don't need to acquire that. That's just acquiring somebody else's junk room. Don't do that.
For me, the gating factor is, do they have an electronic database of their past clients, and have they communicated with those past clients in the last 6 months or a year, right?
Yeah.
Anything more than that, it's gone. The relationship is dead at that point.
I'm with you. 12 to 24 months that, they're like, oh no, my clients love me. No, in your head, they love you.
Right. They have no idea who you are after really 6 months, but
yeah. Yeah, if you call them and say, "Hey, this is Steve," I'm like, "Steve who? Are you trying to sell me something?" I'm like, come on. And this is what I mean by vanity and being the hero of the story.
Right.
Your own vanity and the growth of your practice is a leash. It's a total leash.
Mm-hmm.
So this lesson 3, how to shop for a buyer, and this is why you're critical, because you want to start thinking about who would buy this and why would they buy it and what they'd buy it for. That to me becomes a big thing. So, and I usually, if I get someone who's going to want to sell their practice, I say, okay, let's do a dry run. Put together an offering, like an offering document. Show me what your firm's worth, why it's worth this. Let's put together a 5 to 10 page document that explains what's this business worth, why is it valuable to a buyer. Let's put that together.
Where are the
Well, I don't
assets?
have the time.
Yep.
Yeah. And I don't have time for that. Well, okay. So you really don't have time to even think about this.
All right, Steve. So that's 3 lessons. Now, do you have another one for us?
I do. And this was one that I learned the hard way. Lesson 4 is simplify and streamline for higher profitability. Most of the time when lawyers go to sell their practice, they're really kind of not focused on the profitability of the firm. Like they're making what they need. Most lawyers are making more money than they imagined. And they're really, really kind of dumb, fat, and happy, like they're comfortable. And they don't understand that the margins are incredibly important to the buyer, because most of the time, and Ed, you'll have to speak to this, but most of the time, there's either an earnout or the seller's taking a note back.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're having a third-party successor, like an attorney buying your practice who doesn't have a lot of cash, they've got to make a living while they're running your new practice, and they will not produce the same revenue you produce. They're just not at that skill set. It's not the practice that they're used to running. So their growth will actually go down. So you got to make sure that the net's there to not only pay them so they can make a living, but also a decent net to carry the note so you can get paid if you're taking a note back or if there's an earnout.
There's
a lot of lawyers.
Is the firm has to pay for itself, and it has to pay the salary of the guy or gal who's going to be sitting in the seat. And so if you can't do both of those things.
Exactly. And this is where a lot of lawyers they're just blind to this. So they have to understand the difference between making money as a lawyer in the firm and having the law firm drop a profit to the shareholder.
The only way to really know that truly is you've got to set your W-2 compensation at fair market value, right?
Bingo. Yeah.
If you're setting it at a low number because you want to take out profit or whatever like that, I'll talk to your tax advisor about that because I don't think that's super kosher. But nonetheless, at the end of the day, the only way you're going to get it's going to be judged is when that buyer comes in and they say, well, based on my level of experience, I should be making 150, 200, whatever the number is. And so now, whatever your profit is, we're going to deduct that 200,000, and then that has to satisfy the note payments, right?
Exactly. And it's interesting because I worked with a firm, just completed the transaction, coached the owner for a decade, and she was probably mid-pack income-wise, like making 100, 150. For the past couple of years, she's making 7 figures, like $1 million plus income. And ran the practice very lean. And, what we did was take the income and push it into a pension plan. So she was stuffing like $750 to $1 million a year in a pension plan and showing a net about 150 to 200. So when we start negotiating with the buyer, they're like, "You're only making 200 grand." We had to say, "Look, you have to take out back in the pension plan."
Right.
And, understand that she's been pushing $1 million a year into a pension plan. And because she doesn't need the income. She didn't want to take the income, and she wants to push it towards retirement. And so if you got a sophisticated buyer, they understand that. But the thing that I want to pass on to the audience, listeners on this, when I first had someone interested in buying my practice. So I was probably 6-7 years into the journey of building this practice, and I had a lawyer who wanted to buy it. And he approached me and said, "Look, you got this really great practice. You're taking at the time I was taking 8 weeks off a year." And he's like, "I want that life. I want to do what you're doing, and you don't work that hard, and you're not that smart. So you've got something figured out." So, it's true. So he approaches me, and at the time I think I got 5 lawyers and literally maybe 14, 15 staff. And we do a non-disclosure agreement, and he comes in And he was a friend of one of the attorneys that worked for me and checks everything out. And then he says this thing that was really profound that hit me right between the eyes. And he said, your practice is like 3 times the amount of employees in my current practice. You're running like a 747. I'm used to flying like a Piper Cub.
Interesting.
And if something breaks here, I don't know how to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, so what I thought was really cool, like I built, a couple $1 million practice, throwing down some good money, good operating. He saw it as too complex to operate. So that was a great lesson for me. So when I made the decision to sell it, like, okay, this thing's happened with my mom, my wife and I are talking about it. So what I did then is I started at the bottom, lowest profit margin stuff and the most complex stuff. Some things that I found interesting, things that I thought were really cool to do. So whether it was sophisticated asset protection planning or, doing estate tax planning for $100 million client, and just really, really sophisticated, cool, fun things, they were not highly profitable and they weren't systematized and they were dependent on me. So we just started cutting the least profitable stuff as quickly as possible, focused on the high margin, easy stuff. And so it was the old joke of easy, lucrative, and fun. So it was easy cases, lucrative cases, and fun cases that anyone in the firm is more than capable of doing. So we start really narrowing it on the sweet spot. And so I got rid of all the lawyers except for one. And when I spun out, just helped them set up their own practice. They were litigating for us. A couple others, I just slowly but surely nudged everybody out, got rid of anyone who wasn't A+ star. So I think when I sold it, I had probably 6 superstars. Our intake team was phenomenal. My marketing director was phenomenal. I had a phenomenal paralegal who just was a rock star, team leader who was a rock star. So just really, really great team. So when the decision was made to sell it the next time, I sat with the team and said, here's what's going on with my mom. Here's what's happening. I'm going to sell the practice. I haven't really figured out who I'm going to sell it to yet, but I got a couple of thoughts. And my paralegal says, well, I know just the guy. He's been trying to get me to work for him for like 3 years, but he can't afford me. And he'd like to get a copy of everything on your hard drive because you're beating the crap out of him in the marketplace. So he's trying to get me to come work for him. I don't go work for him, but he would be a great buyer. And if he bought it, then I could work for him and solve 2 problems at one time. And the thing that I learned there was at the time, the firm was very profitable, a lot easier. And in retrospect, I'm like, I probably, I look at it and go, this whole Atticus thing's okay, but that was really good. I should have kept it. But when I looked at it, Ed, I did 2 things. I first got really clear, okay, what's the end game, which I'll lead to lesson number 5 in a minute. What's the end game? And I think I was 47 at the time. And when I engaged in the conversation with the buyer, he was like, oh yeah, I'm all over this. And I gave him 30 days. So we'd sign a non-disclosure. I said, we got 30 days to do a letter of intent. If we do not have a letter of intent in 30 days, I'm out. Mm-hmm. Because I'm not going to do a 6-month, 9-month dance around, which is what I did with the first guy. So I was like, we got 30 days to do a deal. If we don't have a 30 days for the letter of intent, I'm done and I'm going to move on. And so we had a deal done like in 3 weeks as far as the letter of intent, and then 90 days to close. So, we closed pretty quickly. And then, it was a merger, and then he bought my shares out of the merging entity about 6 months, 9 months later.
That's great. So let me comment a couple of things that you said there, because a lot of great stuff there. So the first is the profitability piece, right? So lawyers are very much, especially hourly rate lawyers, are very much focused on the top line piece, right? Just an example from our practice, we used to do these large M&A transactions, and they would generate great fees. We'd have great top line numbers, but they were so intensive in terms of people that the profitability on those was lower than a lot of our smaller fixed fee type engagements that we do that are sale transactions. And so we moved out of that space specifically for that reason, because the profitability wasn't there. The second piece is that, you were talking about the lower level items that weren't very profitable, the asset protection and things of that nature. And what I typically suggest to sellers when they get that is that they raise those prices to make them profitable. And if the practice area goes away, so be it. But at the end of the day, if there's work out there that you can get and you've already set up the marketing piece, then let's see if there's some price elasticity there, right? And get that squared away. So yeah, really important stuff. The next thing is that you brought up was the letter of intent, right? And the buyers in our brokerage firm, one of the brokers there is Sean is his name. And he always has this phrase ABT, always be testing buyers, ABTB, always be testing buyers. And you got to set deadlines. You got to make sure they adhere to the deadlines, because buying a firm or any business is a long and involved process that goes through some real emotional components for the buyer, right? Because the buyer is scared as all there is, right? So you got this kind of dichotomy of, I got to move them forward. I got to keep moving them forward, and I got to make them feel comfortable at the same time. And the way you got to do that is with deadlines, because if you don't set deadlines, they're just going to go limp along, limp along. And eventually it's not going to work. And you wasted 6 months, as you said. So great points, fantastic points.
You nailed something really important, that 90% of the deals that I've been involved with, what drives it are the fear of both sides. So it's a fear-based emotional experience. Most of the time, it's not the finances. Like, the finances are pretty straightforward. Like, the finances are pretty clear, and you can structure a deal. That's pretty easy. At least for me, that's the easiest part. The financial part is a piece of cake in comparison to the emotional elements. And I think for me, the greatest challenge I have in helping a lawyer sell their practice transition, we could probably do a podcast just on the mistakes, incredible mistakes I've seen lawyers make and still continue to make. But it's so terrifying. And it's terrifying because they've done something like 30, 40 years.
Right.
And who am I after this is over? Like, what do I do? Which is probably part of lesson 5 for me.
Yeah. So just quick, you're talking about the crisis of identity. That's what I call it. The crisis of identity.
Totally crisis of identity. Totally.
So tell us lesson 5.
Lesson 5 is you need to have a plan for life after the sale. Mm-hmm. And you nailed it. It's the identity. So after I really didn't appreciate the impact of the crushing loss of identity. So when I sold the practice, there's a transition period. I cleaned up a few cases. I did a co-counsel agreement, worked on some things, but I had moved. Now, I had a pretty cool life in Tampa, like the buildings right next to the biggest Starbucks in Tampa, allegedly one of the biggest in the U.S. And I would pull in my fancy little car and go upstairs, and I was Mr. Riley, or good morning, Steve. And my team had my office pristine, and I had a cup of coffee waiting for me. And it was awesome. Like, I didn't appreciate how good I had it. And then I would meet my buddies for lunch, or my referral sources, and then I'd meet some of my referral sources at coffee, right next door. And it had great clients, really great clients, like really cool clients. After I sold, and we had moved, and I remember one morning taking, my wife went to work, my kids went to school. I took the dogs for a walk, and the dogs looked at me after going for the walk and said, "I don't know about you, but I'm going to take a nap." And I was sitting there in a lazy boy looking around going, holy crap. I was somebody. Now I am, Grace's dad, or Mark's dad, or Kristen's husband. I don't even have a name anymore. At least one point I was Mr. Riley. Right. Now I'm an object related to someone else's name. And so I was stunned at how, I thought, I'll be so free off the stress and everything like that. No, I was crushed by not being emotionally prepared for the next stage of my life. I just was not emotionally prepared for it. And so that led me to looking at buying another practice in Daytona Beach, where I now live, which I tried to do. Nearly acquired a financial planning practice that a friend of mine had, and she was going to retire. And I was like, I loved her practice. But the broker dealer shot it down. And then at the time, I was having conversations with Mark Powers about, he was like, well, what are you going to do next? Why didn't you come work with us for a bit? And I don't know. But there were some benefits to it, So I said, okay, let's try it. And then at the time I said, okay, this makes sense. And, slowly but surely stair-stepped my way into it. It wasn't necessarily like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. So the plan for life after the sale, the why of the next stage of your life is so crucial. And a lot of lawyers just haven't gotten there. And I appreciate from the torturous experience I had a loss of my identity and helping other lawyers sell their practices. I'm like, okay, let's talk about what happens after the deal. What are you going to do? And if you're a lawyer who's worked 10 hours a day for 7 days a week for 30 years, suddenly you're no longer that person in that firm.
Right.
You may think in your head, in your imagination, like, I'll be so liberating, so free. No, you'll be the first person after the sale that will pick up your car, put on your suit, pick up your little lunch pail and go back to work and hang out because you don't know what else to do. You'll be that lawyer, right? Yes. You'll be that lawyer that they can't get out of. You'll be in the way. If they need you, they'll call you.
Yeah.
But it's remarkable. Like, well, I'm going to hang out in the office. I just did it. I did a couple of interesting ones are parent to child transactions where the kid's a lawyer, dad's a lawyer, or mom's a lawyer. I got one where mom's in her 80s and daughter's in her late 40s and 50s. Mom's been technically no longer a shareholder for 2 to 3 years, and she wants to go in every day, every week for the team meetings.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is who she is. This is what she's done. She wants to be there.
Yeah, I call it the second act, and a little bit of inside baseball. It's one of the first questions I ask when somebody reaches out to me and they're wanting to sell their firm. I want to know, what's your plan for afterwards? Because what I find is that they will sabotage the deal. So we'll be in the middle of the deal, and they'll do stupid things that'll totally sabotage the deal. And I don't want to be there. I don't want to push them into something that isn't going to work for them.
Yeah.
But, it's interesting to me because I've encountered many lawyers who are in their mid or late 70s who should not be practicing. They absolutely should. I can hear it on the phone. And they just can't let go. They don't know when the right time to let go is. And I feel badly for them. I can't imagine that it was your whole life and then it would go away. And potentially, those kinds of things kill people, right? Because they have no purpose and they just wither and die when that happens.
It's a double whammy, right? So they adopted the die at the desk strategy, like I'm just going to die here.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing, and this one of the things that's weird, may not resonate with your audience, but if they don't have a great relationship with their spouse or with their family, they'd rather work.
Yeah.
I have a lot of lawyers that I've seen over the years that when I say, I would like you to take, 6 weeks off, 8 weeks off, I like to go. And they're like, I'm not so excited about that because I don't have anything great to do. Well, what do you mean? You and I were talking before the podcast. I just took 5 weeks off and did a great trip in the South Pacific and with my wife. We kind of like you, we've been married so long that I can't tell you how long we've been married, like 30 plus years. Neither one of us can remember how long. And I have lawyers that when I we work with them, they're like, yeah, I like to go to conferences. I like to do CLE things with my friends. I don't like to go home. And I'm like, have you told your spouse? And they're like, what? Have you told your spouse you want a divorce? Because you've clearly decided you don't want to be with this person.
Right.
You've clearly decided this is not a relationship that you want to invest in because you don't even spend the weekend with them, let alone 5 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
The short-term pain, the long-term pain. Let's make a decision here. Do you want to stay with them or don't want to stay with them? And there's so many lawyers that just, for whatever reason, either they haven't cultivated the relationship, they have invested in the relationship, that they've just done a terrible job with the relationship. They don't have anywhere to go because at least, as one lawyer told me, at least at work, I have some level of respect. I'm respected. At home, I'm not respected.
Yeah.
So that's another weird thing I've dealt with. Fortunately for me, that was not and is not my issue. But it's a fascinating challenge for a lot of lawyers that they're like, no, I'd rather I got one lawyer. No, I'm going to shut up, Ed. I got one lawyer, phenomenally gifted attorney. Phenomenally gifted. We had 5 deals on the table with his associates, who are on their 40s and 50s, by the way.
Oh, wow.
And all very accomplished attorneys. And he's got this super expertise. He's like really well known for this one thing he does. And he just couldn't do it. And finally, kind of like you, he was sabotaging deals left and right. And I said, so is the plan to die at the desk? He goes, yeah, actually it is.
Yeah.
I don't want to go home. I like who I am. So he's now of counsel, took his best assistant, got let go of like 20 staff, 4 or 5 lawyers, took his best 13 clients. He's named me in his estate plan as the trustee to clean up his practice. I love him, but I told him, dude, I've got to tell you, I'm not going to clean it up. You got to have somebody else clean that up. I'm not going to do it. But his goal is to die at the desk.
Wow.
And sometimes and for me, our goal is great life, great practice. Is that what a great life looks like to you? God bless you. Go for it.
Yeah, I guess that is true. I guess we do not impose our beliefs on them, but at the same time, if you're listening to this and you're in your 40s and you're worried that this is you heading down the path, 40s and 50s, there's still time to change, right? It's like the Dickens story, there's still time to change. You're not baked in. I would say to you that life is a lot more than just you as a lawyer and your practice. And you should certainly look at it from the standpoint of what else should I be experiencing with my life at this stage? So
if you got to ask the question, I think it's a great point. You got to ask the question, do you own the practice or the practice own you?
Yes.
And if you're owned by the practice, like you said, Ed, you can get out. And you can get out of that trap. And it's one of the things that makes me very passionate about what you do and what I do, which is helping other lawyers to say, hey, look, there's another path. And that path, I promise, there'll be some bumps, but it's a lot more fun, usually a lot more lucrative, a lot more meaningful, and allows you to really make the most of your practice in life. Because those lawyers that have a great life outside the practice usually build the better practices. The lawyers that don't have a great life outside the practice usually build pretty miserable practices because they don't have anything better to do.
Yeah.
Like they got nothing better to do.
That's a perfect segue into, I know that Atticus helps lawyers get there, and there is a course in particular, a seminar called The Path to Great Practice and a Great Life. Tell us about that.
Thanks, Ed. It's one of the entryways into Atticus because it's kind of hard to explain who we are and what we do. A lot of what we used to be about as a company is helping lawyers make more money and reduce stress. And what we realized over the years, getting feedback from our clients, is that they come to make more money, but they really stay for this conversation, this concept of building and cultivating a great life. So we've designed a virtual workshop that goes from, I think it's 10 a.m. Eastern to about 4 p.m. Eastern that you can pop in. It's no charge to our existing members, but I think there's a retail price, like $800, $900. I don't know. I'll give you a link to put in the show notes. But or you can go to our website, atticusadvantage.com, and check it out. If that's too much of a commitment, or you're like, it sounds like a lot of work, you can always sign up to our newsletter at grow@atticusadvantage.com. So there's a lot of things on our website. We do free webinars, 1 or 2 a month. We do paid for virtual workshops once a quarter. I taught the one on how to increase how to improve your billable practice, up-leveling your billable practice. So there's a lot of things that we do, everything from practical time management, pricing strategies, how to hire. Our hiring department called Build My Great Team has been on fire, helping people place. And it's not a placement department. It's like a really cheap way of finding new employees. It's more like a strategic delegation. So we're trying to do everything we can to support lawyers in building that practice, but not necessarily saying that there's only one way to build that practice. There's a lot of cool ways to build a practice. And kind of like you built a wonderful niche and a wonderful practice that's got this wonderful component of helping lawyers sell their practice. Plus you have the cool brokerage. So I think there's a lot of different ways to do this.
I tell you what, and I wholeheartedly endorse Atticus and everything you guys are doing. I always find it interesting when I'm working with someone who has either been through Atticus or whatnot. There's a different way of viewing the practice, and it makes it a lot easier to have the conversations that we typically have about the exit or the transition, whatever is going to happen. And so I would fully recommend that. And I would also recommend going ahead and subscribing to the Great Practice, Great Life podcast. I love it. I listen to it all the time, and can't say enough good things about it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good. Thank you for being on, Steve. Fantastic information. We will definitely have to do a second episode because I know there's a lot more behind all of it. So thanks, Steve. Thanks. All right. Talk to you soon.